What do Lasha Talahadse, Guo Sing Chun, Toshiki Yamamoto, and pretty much every other top lifter have in common? They're all brutally strong. And today, we're going to look at how you can be too. We'll go over the basics of strength training, whether there are differences when training men and women, training in the menstrual cycle, whether strength slows you down, and much, much more. Let's start with an obvious but sometimes overlooked fact. Strength sports require you to be strong. Shocking, I know. And here's another one. Olympic weightlifting is, in fact, a strength sport. But sometimes it might not seem that way, given the amount of time people devote to pushing methodologies that have very little to do with getting stronger. The result is you can find yourself with an hour-long warm-up in a quest to be a supple panther, an anxiety disorder from squat college telling you about your supposedly flawed movement patterns, and training complexes that look more like physics equations than exercises when written out in full. Despite all these efforts, your PRs haven't gone up a single kilo since season 1 of Game of Thrones.
It can't get any worse.
Sometimes the real problem is just that you're weak as a kitten. I'm being a bit facetious here, but not much. No one would seriously say that things like stretching, mobility work, and technique have no place in weightlifting, even if plenty of us don't actually put these things into practice with our own training. But let's be honest, often what you really need is just to get stronger. Every single athlete you watch at the national or international level is, by definition, exceptionally strong. With that in mind, let's take a look at strength training. Broadly speaking, strength is the ability to produce force. If you increase your strength, it means you've improved your force production abilities. We can demonstrate and measure strength in a variety of ways, but in weightlifting, we're looking for strength, force production, within a relatively narrow, predetermined set of parameters. We need to produce a lot of force very quickly in the execution of the snatch and clean and jerk. Other strength aspects are nice to have and may transfer to the lifts, having a strong squat, for example, or being able to do multiple reps or complexes with high percentages of your PRs. But at the end of the day, all that matters in weightlifting is your 1RM in the competition lifts. While strength training can seem confusing or complicated, it's helpful to remember that a few basic principles form the foundation of what we know to be true about strength training. These are progressive overload, specificity, variation, recovery, and finally, individuality. We'll touch on individuality later, but for now let's let an expert help us understand these terms better. Claire Zai is a nationally competitive powerlifter and strength coach with a master's in physiology. Let's hear what she has to say about the fundamentals.
The main tenets of a program that we always look for, or that I always look for, is that it is specific to whatever goals that you have. So when someone comes to me and they're like, I want to get stronger, I'm like, all right, what is it that you want to be able to do? Tell me what that strength looks like for you. So it's specific to their goals. It's repeatable and progressive. So that person can do that workout again and again, probably the same workout again and again, and either somehow progresses over time insofar that like the weights get heavier or the range of motion gets larger or something is making the work that you are doing greater without it actually getting harder. So that's what I mean by progressive.
It seems like we can't just train 1RMs all the time, right? So to what extent are you broadening, let's say, things like rep range?
So there's good evidence to show that having a lot of variation in training, so having a wide range of rep ranges, movements, metabolic systems that you're accessing and utilizing gives you this base upon which you can build all these other adaptations. And we need you to be able to adapt to it.
So again, progressive overload, specificity, variation, and recovery, all on an individual basis. Now that we've got the basics, let's look at a subset of strength training. What do we know about training for men versus women? If you've been living on planet Earth, there's a good chance you've heard some narrative around how men and women need to train differently. This includes everyone from bottom-feeding fitfluencers preying on women's insecurities, up to legitimate coaches with years of experience and good intentions. But what do we really know about training men versus women?
The myth that I hear a lot is that men respond better to training than women do. There was a study by Atianen et al. They gave like 500 people the same training program, asked them all to do it, men and women. Some people responded really, really well to that training. Some people got weaker on that training, and men and women were interspersed between all of the individuals. So it's less dependent on sex and more dependent on something else.
There's nothing that you know of that says we need to train women in a specific way.
No. There's evidence to show like that there are trends. There is some, and I say some very, very loosely, some evidence to show that women are less fatigable than men. The problem is that that's not how we train athletes. We train athletes based on how they perform. If someone is telling you that you are special and you need something special for your training because you're a woman, I would question that very hard, because most women do not need a special training program.
Okay, fine. So maybe people have been overstating, if not outright fabricating, the case for different training programs for men and women. Whatever population level differences are seen tend to pale in comparison to individual differences. Just imagine how silly you'd look as a coach if an athlete like Mary Thiessen Lappin came into your gym and you said she needed to train differently because you heard women lack upper body strength. But what about training and the menstrual cycle?
The menstrual cycle is a cycle that happens of our natural hormones that rise and fall over the course of approximately 28 days. The two main hormones that we're looking at are estrogen and progesterone. Progesterone is thought to have a catabolic effect. It breaks things down, whereas estrogen is thought to be more protective or anabolic. People are like, oh, this is an issue. Like, when we look at hormone concentrations for women across their menstrual cycle and their strength across their menstrual cycle, we don't see similar decreases in strength. We see like pretty consistent strength levels for women across a menstrual cycle, and these like wildly changing estrogen levels. This is when you're looking at like a broad base of research. There are definitely women who experience these changes during the menstrual cycle where they have like major changes in their ability to perform, in their ability to recover across their menstrual cycle. It's when we're talking about large-scale population-based recommendations. If you are training and you don't notice a difference, don't worry about it. Don't periodize your training based on your menstrual cycle. Autoregulation is probably going to be better. All of the things that are encompassed by autoregulation, the period is also lumped in with that.
We only have time to cover the surface of this topic in this video. If you want a more thorough discussion of training in the menstrual cycle, I highly recommend Claire's 4-part series on this very issue. Okay, now that we've got a little primer on strength and strength training, let's get to some specifics, like what movements provide the greatest transfer of strength to your competition total. Number 1, snatch and clean and jerk. I'm being a little cheeky, but not really. If you want your competition lifts to go up, then you will almost certainly need to lift heavy weights in the snatch and clean and jerk. This all goes back to that principle of specificity. The transfer from snatch to snatch or clean and jerk to clean and jerk will be 1-to-1. Moving beyond the Olympic lifts to more pure strength-based movements, you need a big squat. While there is a fair amount of individual variability, there is a pretty solid correlation between squatting 1 RM and results in the snatch and clean and jerk. For most people, this probably means doing both back and front squats, even if you're someone who hates doing the latter, like me. Pulling strength is also crucial, so some work from the floor is probably a good idea.
If you're used to pulling really high loads off the floor, even if it is just that first pull, the pull to the knee, actually doing it for a period of training is a really good way of enhancing that strength. But I do think there's a huge amount of benefit in that task. If you're doing a pulling variation, we can go above our 1 RM. So we can use heavier loads.
There's also some recent evidence that pressing strength correlates with jerk performance. Although like all strength training research, there's limits to how much we can generalize from this, and how strong the results are. Thus, the absolute basics for building strength in Olympic weightlifting should probably include squats, some pulling variations, and presses, either strict or with a leg drive. Having said all this, remember one of the key principles of strength training: individuality. For many people, presses won't help their jerk, for example. If you've found this to be the case, use that knowledge to your benefit and focus your efforts elsewhere. If you're new to the sport and don't yet know what works, consider the joy and frustration you get to experience as you learn what works for you and how your body responds to various training stimuli. What about reps, sets, and weights? Again, that depends, which should be no surprise. But let's look broadly at beginners versus more established lifters. If you're a beginner, you are in the enviable position of being able to do almost any form of strength training and have it work. Seriously, if all you want to do is get stronger, there is nothing wrong with using a basic 5x5 program. That is, 5 sets of 5 at a weight that is challenging but not too hard, and adding weight in small increments every week. This type of linear progression will absolutely work. If you're intermediate or advanced, it's a little trickier, because strength gains won't come as easily. You probably can't just add weight every session. Progressive loading or overloading will mean, among other things, regularly altering variables other than weight. This could be reps, or speed, or sets, for example, instead of or in addition to weight or other aspects. But you should also have a sense of what works for you by this point. I learned pretty early on that I did not respond well to high-volume training. Occasional bouts of it were okay, and it was good for building some work capacity and endurance, but when it came to building strength, I was much more likely to respond to lower training volumes. So, with few exceptions, that's how I structured a fair amount of my training, whatever stage you're at. Keep in mind that weightlifting requires a single effort at a heavy weight. Correspondingly, much of your strength training should be in the range of 1 to 5 reps, and you should be doing a fair amount of work at 80 or 85% and up. If we're thinking in terms of RPE, this probably means working around an 8 with some regularity, and every so often you'll need to be at 9 or 10. Even technical work will benefit from heavier percentages, as there's evidence to suggest that skill development is dependent on load. That is, your technique at heavy weights is best improved by, surprise, surprise, lifting heavy weights. Specificity again. Of course, don't forget that you want a broad base of adaptations to prepare you for competition, so a certain amount of variety in weights and reps can be good. Plenty of excellent training programs utilize periods when reps are in the 8 to 10 range, although very few would do so the day before a competition. As with so many things, it's all about context and timing. Remember again, specificity. This is even more important as you near a competition, so you want to focus on movements and rep ranges that more closely match the competition setting, that is, heavy singles and the classic lifts. Above all, don't be afraid to trust how you feel and what your numbers are telling you. If you feel good and your numbers are moving in the right direction, then you're probably doing something right. Fears about strength training making you slower are probably overblown, at least for Olympic weightlifters. Remember that we are trying to move quickly with a heavy load. We therefore need to accept a balance of strength and speed. A big strength reserve, which allows you to produce force in a variety of conditions, from static to explosive, is essential. A few simple guidelines, based on evidence from research and practice, can help maintain explosivity. One is to avoid too much fatigue within a set or a training session, for example by using fewer reps or lower volume. As reps and volume increase, bar speeds generally decrease, which is usually what we are trying to avoid. This is part of the logic behind velocity-based training, that is, keeping bar speeds at a certain level, which Coach Spencer Arnold discusses in our warm-up video of Jordan De La Cruz.
So I attach the speed thing, that hey, you can go as heavy as you want as long as you're X speed or whatever.
Just focusing on being explosive can also help. While things like slow tempo lifts absolutely have their place in building strength, remember that strength gains tend to be very specific. That is, training at higher speeds will favorably result in high-speed strength gains compared to training with lower speeds. There's also some interesting work that's been done on using cluster sets. If you've never heard of cluster sets, they're basically a rep scheme that allows for short periods of rest within a set. For example, in a traditional 8-rep back squat, you'd have to pick a weight around 70-75% probably of your 1RM. You could move pretty quickly at first with this weight, but likely you'd slow down to grind out those last few reps. In a cluster set, you might be able to use 80 or 85% and then do 2 reps, re-rack the bar and rest for 20 or 30 seconds, do another 2 reps, re-rack and rest, and so on until you did 8 reps total. The result is a greater load with the same amount of volume and less loss in velocity. Attempting to move explosively while avoiding fatigue is crucial to maintaining or developing speed while building strength. So cluster sets are worth considering. This is a big topic though, and one I can only touch on here, especially since I've only just begun looking at the research. If you'd like to learn more about cluster sets, let us know in the comments and we'll see about putting together a separate video exploring this topic in more depth and its uses in Olympic weightlifting. As a general reminder, strength training really isn't rocket science, even if there's a sea of content out there telling you otherwise. And while the underlying science of strength training, the how of all this, can be complex and unclear, you don't necessarily need to know that science to follow the basics of an individual approach based on progressive overload, specificity, variability, and recovery. We didn't touch on it too much in this video, but recovery is absolutely essential. You need to eat and sleep and make sure you're doing everything you can to bounce back for that next workout. And you need to make sure you are making it to that next workout. Consistency is absolutely key when it comes to strength training. It really can be that simple. It's best to tune out the noise trying to convince you that something is wrong with you or that you're doing something the wrong way and then selling you something to fix that perceived error. Are you going to sit here and tell Dong Wei her movement patterns are wrong because her knees cave? People who prey on these insecurities are only making strength training seem harder, more opaque, and less accessible than it really is. In short, they're part of the problem, even as they claim to be offering a solution. In a strength sport like weightlifting, you need a good strength foundation built on solid principles we know to be true. This is your base. Now, odds are you are not a preteen weightlifting wonderkind with 10 to 12 hours a day to dedicate to training. You have school or a job, maybe a family or a couple beagles to care for, plus boatloads of ATG videos to catch up on. So you can't dedicate 5 years to your foundation before starting to think about your competitive goals. But you can incorporate the fundamentals of strength training into building your foundation at any point. And being strong is a good foundation, not just for strength sports, but for life. All you need to do is lift heavy, be consistent, and follow a few basic guidelines. Also, it doesn't hurt if you take just a tiny bit of training. Thanks for watching, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this and really appreciate your support. If you want to follow up on my work and do your own research, which I suggest, I'll include links to some articles in the description, including Claire Zai's excellent articles on strength training and the menstrual cycle. Again, thanks for watching, and thank you to our Patreon supporters. If you like this video, consider becoming a supporter to get tons more content like this.